Welcome back to The Odds Against Us, a podcast about how gambling hooks people, who it harms, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Connor Wynn, and today I'm joined by a special guest, Matt Missar. Matt, why don't you start by telling us a little about yourself?
Sure, Connor, thanks for having me on. My name's Matt. I am a licensed clinical social worker as well as an internationally certified gambling counselor. I also have a certification to treat gaming disorder as well. I work in a private practice setting, and those are pretty much my two main areas of expertise is problem gambling and problem video gaming. And definitely see a convergence of those two, especially within the last couple of years. So that's usually where my clinical focus lies at this point.
So I guess my first question would be like, what's a typical day look like for you?
Sure, a typical day is seeing a handful of clients, and that can range depending on the day. But individual setting, so usually working with an individual one-on-one, either working through, as I said, problem gambling, problem gaming, or just addressing general mental health. But meet with them for a 1 hour therapy session. Within that, sometimes based on the individual's needs, we'll occasionally do a family session if we see fit, or bringing in a spouse, family member to help for a one-off session. And then also within the day is some administrative stuff, as well as some supervisions, collaboration with other colleagues, so we can discuss what we're seeing, and work together in terms of helping each other on specific clinical cases that we might be struggling with.
So I take it you typically see like a lot of younger kids like under 18, or is that uh,
About, yeah. So a large majority or portion of my caseload right now is probably within the like 16 to 26-year-old age group,
okay.
for both gambling and gaming. The gaming right now, my clients who are struggling with gaming typically tend to be younger, but gambling can range from 16 plus at this point, with who I'm seeing.
And would you say like usually like the individual, like if it's a kid, do they like want to go in, or do you think parents like force them to, I guess?
It depends on the kid. Definitely, it's unique to each individual. I will say the younger clients are typically there at their parents' request,
Yeah.
and so that can make it sometimes tough, engagement wise. So that's why really my goal is to create just a safe, healthy environment for these individuals to talk about whatever they want to talk about. If I'm meeting with, let's say, a 13-year-old who's coming in because their parents think they have an unhealthy relationship with gaming, obviously that'll be our main focus. But it's not going to be everything we always talk about. We're going to explore social life, hobbies, things like that. So sometimes I do run into resistance because it might not be the younger individual's first choice to do therapy, but I try to make it as comfortable and as engaging of a space as possible
Yeah.
for them.
Does like gambling and gaming, I guess, like come up in the same person a lot, or is that usually like two different people? Like you have a lot of gaming clients and then some gambling, or are they a
There's a
lot
lot more
similar?
overlap
Yeah.
nowadays, just because we just see this growing convergence in the gaming and gambling space, specifically the way that we're seeing a lot more gambling mechanics popping up in video games. So the reason I kind of got into both, well, the gaming side of things, was I was meeting with a lot of clients to address problem gambling, a lot of younger clients, like in their early 20s. And what I found was that a lot of them just reported playing video games in the first place, which is a great and healthy hobby. But when we talked more about it, in terms of like their earliest exposure to gambling, what I started to see was a lot of these individuals' first exposures to gambling was in the video games they were playing, whether it was a loot box or just, and I think there's like a Mario Party game that like has a poker mini game or a casino mini game. And so it's not that you're maybe actually like gambling in it, but it's just the exposure of, oh, hey, this is what a casino looks like. This is what a roulette wheel looks like. And so I started to see that, this initial exposure to gambling was happening in video games. It wasn't happening on a DraftKings app or anything like that. It was is coming up at a younger age, in video games, and so that really got me interested in, okay, this convergence is clearly there, and it's just been growing over the years because of loot boxes and things like that.
Yeah, sometimes I'm currently like writing a bit of a research paper, and I've saw that it's not really, or from the study I saw, it wasn't really gaming itself. It's more like spending money inside of games, like
Hmm.
buying like there's some people that might spend 8 hours or on Fortnite a day, but I don't know. At least from their studies, they found that people specifically who bought like loot boxes or, open like Ultimate Team and Madden. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Hmm. Yeah.
like those type of things is really where like kind of correlated to problem gambling later on. So
Sure. Yeah, it's that
yeah.
exposure to those gambling mechanics. So like,
Hmm.
yeah, loot boxes, because they simulate
Hmm.
exactly what gambling does. And both the psychological impact of them, but also just the display interface. So like, yeah, I'm thinking of. I think this might be the same for Madden Ultimate Team, but I know for when I used to play like FIFA Ultimate Team growing up, when you opened a pack, the cards you couldn't see what cards you were getting, but they would spin in a kind of carousel.
Hmm.
And it's similar to as a roulette wheel would spin, or even a slot machine technically. And so it looked like gambling, and so it wasn't just that, hey, this is a gambling mechanic. It actually looks like it as well. But yeah, just playing video games, while there are some overlaps in terms of just like the dopamine you get just from playing a video
Yeah.
game, it is that exposure to the actual gambling like content in video games that can really prime someone or put them at higher risk for gambling later in life.
Yeah. Do you think like there's anything to or be able to do like regulate these large gaming companies to remove like chance-based rewards, or do you think it's kind of inevitable?
I think something can be done about it. There's a lot more going on in other countries. So I know I've seen articles. I think South Korea has started to address like microtransactions and loot boxes. I want to say the UK has started to do stuff about it. So various countries are starting to address mainly microtransactions and gambling like mechanics in video games. I think it's just tough because it requires a lot of government intervention in that way, and there's just a lot of money behind the gaming industry, the video gaming industry. And so I think in the US it's possible, but it's a uphill battle. But I think it definitely is something that can be achieved, and I think it's something we should push for, because a lot of video games right now are really microtransactions first, video
Hmm.
game enjoyment second.
Yeah. I mean, as a high schooler, I've obviously experienced this myself. Currently a rising senior, but I'm interested to hear like how have you heard like how underage people are able to get on some of these gambling platforms?
It's so easy, and it's
Yeah.
unfortunately so easy. And kids are smart. Kids and teenagers are smart. If they want to do something, they're gonna find a way to do it. And so how I'm seeing it happen is through a variety of different ways. So one is video games, so the gambling in video games. Another method is through illegal offshore sites. Just sites that aren't regulated by either a state or the U.S. themselves. And there's no, if there is an age verification for some of these offshore illegal sites, it's very easy to get around. So that's where you find someone under 21 or under 18 being able to get access. Social casinos as well are another one. So those are kind of popular ones. Like I see a lot of times Fliff being a big
Yeah.
one.
I've heard that one a lot.
So that one again, they kind of go through some legal loopholes to show that they aren't gambling sites when they ultimately, at their bare bones, are. But they can kind of get around it through the way they advertise themselves or set up themselves. So that, and then another one that I've come across since starting to work with high school age individuals is bookie systems, sports books that are being run through the student in the high school. So, maybe there are a couple high schoolers, maybe some seniors who are running an illegal sports book operation. And so that's one that, parents might not be aware of are happening at schools. But at this point, I would have to imagine that every school's got some illegal sports book being run by a student. So it's something to be aware of. But that's typically how individuals under 21 and under 18 are able to find access to gambling. Also, I should throw out just getting parents login information or
Yeah,
their
yeah.
social security number. So a lot of times I've had clients who their parents have either created an account for them to use using the parents' information, or the kid has, taken their parents' information and created an account.
Yeah.
So they can still find access legally. It's just not using their own personal identifying information. So there are a lot of open doors that lead to an individual under legal age to find access to gambling.
Have you heard of like platforms called like RainBet? Because like RainBet and Fliff, I would say, are the biggest ones here, along with like prediction
Mm-hmm.
markets like Kalshi and Pally Market.
Yep.
What are your
Yeah, I've
thoughts on
heard
those?
they're not great to say the least. Again, just because, yeah. So for those, you don't have to be 21. I think the age limit for those is 18. Um, they're just so terrible because you can bet on any really aspect of human life, and it
Yeah.
really gamifies just the human experience, which I think is just unhealthy. But just the lack of regulation around it, the amount of insider trading that I'm sure is happening right now, where people know a lot more information about certain outcomes and are able to essentially, game the system. But I think the ability to bet on anything is just so enticing to everyone, but especially this younger crowd whose brains are still developing. Their risk taking and impulsivity are at almost all time highs, and so their brains are primed to be attracted to gambling, but these prediction markets even more so. So I am not a fan at all of prediction markets.
What do you think about like advertising, like especially streamers, I guess nowadays with young kids, most kids are watching some form of like either Twitch or Kick or something like
Mm-hmm.
that.
And there are a lot of I guess shady advertising tactics. One of the big ones I'll usually point out to parents, or even just to kind of clue in some younger clients who might not be aware, is what you're seeing on some of these streamers, the content, if they're streaming like gambling content, is you're not getting the full picture of what's actually going on. A lot of times, these streamers, if they're being promoted, I'm trying to think of the word, by gambling sites, they're not gambling with their own money. So if you see a streamer and he's betting tens of
Hmm.
$1,000 hands of poker on his stream, more often than not, it's not his own money that he's using. He's being given it by whatever gambling company he's promoting. But they don't necessarily always disclose that. So if I'm an impressionable 15-year-old watching this stream and I'm watching my favorite streamer and he's losing thousands of dollars each hand, it starts to normalize it to me. And I think,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
he's not bothered that he's losing this much money. I won't be bothered if I lose that much money. But they don't know that he's not gambling with his own money. It's money that's being fronted by his sponsorships. And so
yeah.
it kind of downplays the actual risk associated there.
Have you like? I guess some people probably watch them to like maybe cope with their cravings in a way. Do you think like it would enhance, I guess, their cravings or kind of reduce and relieve them?
I think the initial thought sometimes that I hear is, oh, if I watch somebody else do it, it'll be better than me
Yeah,
doing it, which is true. It's if you're not gambling, yes, that's better than you gambling. However, ultimately, it can lead to strong urges, especially if you're really struggling in your recovery. And watching somebody else gamble might really bring about a lot of urges within yourself, just because that content again is being thrown right in your face. And you might still get a small dopamine hit from watching somebody else win, and that might elicit an urge in you to go gamble yourself. So it can be difficult for an individual who may be struggling with problem gambling themselves or compulsive gambling themselves to watch a streamer or somebody else gamble, because while it's not you gambling and potentially losing money, it's still risky in terms of it bringing up a trigger or urge for yourself to gamble.
I'm curious, what do you think like the percentage of high schoolers, or I guess boys, especially like currently gamble in some type of way?
I don't know if I can give a specific number, but I would say it's high. I would say it's
Mhm.
high, and I'm sure there's some research out there that give actual statistics around it. But I think just because it's so normalized, and for young men, especially high school age, it's become its own kind of culture. So like when you're talking about sports, it's less so about like, hey, this is the team I like and this is how well they're doing. It's like, hey, this is the bet I actually placed on this game and those kind of things. So like the discussions around sports
Yeah,
are
that's
so
what I've
much different
noticed.
now. Yeah, so you
Yeah.
can't just you can't ignore it. And so I
Hmm.
would say it's a high percentage who have either not necessarily a high percentage that have a gambling problem, but who have gambled. I'm sure it's a very high percentage of high school boys have had some exposure or participation in it.
And obviously, research is difficult because it's like, or trying to find like an exact percentage because it's so easily to hide or easy to hide.
Hmm.
With it can be so secretive compared to you show up home with a bunch of alcohol in your system. It's a lot easier to tell than if you're gambling here and there in your bed and when you're alone. So.
Right. It's an invisible addiction. Yeah.
Mhm.
If I'm sitting here on my phone, you can't tell if I'm scrolling through Instagram or if I'm losing thousands of dollars on a betting platform. And then you pair that with the intense feelings of guilt and shame that typically come along with any addiction. But for our conversation with gambling addiction, the guilt and shame are so strong that, I've had so many clients who they know what they're doing is harming them. They know they need to, reach out for help or, reach out to and let their family know. But that guilt and shame is so strong that it keeps them from seeking help. So that is a really important thing for parents to know if they're trying to talk with their kids or teenagers about gambling, is understand that if your teenager is struggling with problem gambling, that they're feeling intense feelings of guilt and shame, and so you want to be aware and cautious of that when trying to engage in conversations around gambling.
It's also interesting because I feel like a lot of people who gamble and may actually lose a lot don't actually think they're like a problem gambler. Do you ever run into that? It's like they acknowledge that it's a problem that other people have, but they don't themselves don't think it's like, applies to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's the cognitive distortions or well, rational thought patterns of I'm just one parlay away from getting out of this hole. I can turn this around quick, and yeah, oh, I can see that this person has a problem, but that doesn't apply to me. Again, there's that a little bit of a denial there in terms of recognizing the actual harm that they are doing to themselves through gambling. So yes, I do see that quite often.
It's such like a hidden thing. Like, what are some early signs, I guess, that you may tell parents or you try to advocate for people to look for when, kids are 13, 14?
Yeah, a handful of things. Maybe preoccupation with sports slash gambling. So maybe they're talking about it a lot more than usual. But that's not. Again, these are potential warning signs that maybe in culmination point to a gambling problem or just an unhealthy relationship with gambling. But in isolation, it doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah.
that gambling is a problem. So yeah, talking about preoccupation with sports or preoccupation with gambling, mood changes. So if you see an increase in anxiety or depressive symptoms or irritability as well, they're often we see mood swings when it comes to if a client's winning or losing. It'll really dictate their mood. So if you're seeing dramatic mood swings in your teenager. Financially is one of the only kind of like ways you'll see it. Like on as you made a really great point, like with alcohol or drug use, you'll see that on somebody. But with gambling, you can't really see it very well. And so one
Yeah.
of the things could be preoccupation with their phone. Another one is finances. So if you are seeing in their bank account they're making a bunch of increased number of Venmo transactions, or you're seeing when they on their payday, if they've got a part-time job, their paycheck, if you can see their bank account, their paycheck's gone immediately. Those are some warning signs that problem gambling might be at play there.
Along with, I guess, besides those, are there any other ways that I guess parents caught their kids and ended up coming in to see you guys?
I mean, sometimes a student bookie will be looking to get paid back, and so they'll reach out to parents. That's rare. Um, but usually it's parents will kind of find a financial trail and realize like, hey, where's all your money going? I see that sometimes with college students, who are getting like a weekly allowance from their parents or things like that, and they are reaching out to their parents more often, asking for more money to cover certain expenses. Unrelated to gambling, like, oh hey, I just need more money for groceries and things like that. But oh hey, I just gave you $100 at the beginning of the week. Where'd that go? Oh, I had to put it to X, Y, and Z. So if they're again asking for money more often, things like that. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of the more general ways that parents have kind of caught on.
Yeah.
Sometimes, again, an individual will hit a point where they realize within themselves, hey, change needs to happen. I can't keep living like this, and that's where they then come to their parents. Instead of getting caught, they go to their parents and say, hey, I've really been struggling with this. I need help. And that's usually when either they or their parents will reach out to me and we'll get something set up. But yeah, sometimes it just takes the client to say enough is enough. I realize I have a problem and I need to reach out for help, and so that happens often as well.
Yeah. Back to like the bookie thing, I'm a little more curious of like how you've heard that's come about because I guess in my school, maybe I don't know about it, but it's not I guess one of the more common ways that people are able to gamble.
Sure, yeah. So this one, I feel like it's becoming more and more common in high school. So essentially, what I've seen happen is, let's say, let's just take a senior for example. They will set up a sports book. So either maybe they're using their parents' DraftKings account, or they've found a website where they can run their own sports book. And then what I've seen happen is you have this kind of one senior main bookie who then will hire agents in like a kind of pyramid scheme, hire agents to go around, get other students to place bets with them, and then they split the profits and things like that, and they run their own sports book. So just like you have DraftKings operating a sports book, that's like on a large scale. This is on a much smaller micro scale, but it's operating the exact same way. So I'm not betting. If I'm a high school sophomore, I'm not betting through a FanDuel account because I can't. But hey, I know this senior in my English class, he runs a sports book. I can just give him $20, say I want to bet on this team, and then if I win, he'll pay me out or Venmo me out. And so I see that starting to become much more prominent in high schools.
Why do you think like the issue is grown so exponentially inside of like high schools and colleges, I guess, compared to, maybe older people?
I think across the board, it's expanding, and for a variety of different reasons for young people. It's the normalization of it. So it's just become so mainstream. You can't watch a live sports game, or even just any. You can't really watch any content without being thrown a gambling ad in your face. But it's just become so normalized. So like especially with sports, if I'm talking sports, I'm talking gambling now because they're so converged. And you see that with sports talk shows on ESPN or whatever. Channel, what have you, but you're seeing that there's always a sports segment followed by a sports betting segment. It's so ingrained in it. So there's this normalization piece of it. The ease of accessibility, so how easy it is to be able to gamble, is another one. As I mentioned earlier, that kind of just like we'll call it kind of cultural norm, if you will, amongst younger individuals, is just like, hey, this is just something we talk about now, and I want to fit in with my friends who are doing this, so I'm going to do it as well. So those are kind of the three, I think, things that really are speeding it up in terms of its hold on this younger generation. And then you do have to take into the kind of neurobiology side of things of a young person's brain that's still developing. I always use the analogy, young individuals, again, that like 16 to 26-year-old age range, they've got race car brains. And what I mean by that is, they've got really sensitive acceleration. So that part of their brain that's risk taking, that's impulsive.
Yeah.
It is super sensitive, so it goes 0 to 100 very quick, and it's much more intense than a young child or an adult's reward system is. And then so they've got super sensitive acceleration, but then their brakes, the part of their brain that's saying, hey, let's think this through, let's long-term plan, is this a good decision, is it not, that's still getting developed. So we're still putting the brakes together. So their race car brain goes really fast on that impulse, but the part of their brain that's saying, hey, let's think this through, is still in the process of being developed. So they're at such a high risk of, being vulnerable to things such as gambling or video games or drugs, alcohol, because they're so impulsive and risk taking.
Yeah. How do you guys go about, I guess, confronting or fixing the issue? Because I think you mentioned something on NPR, like you can't just come in and be super confrontational and fire at them. So
Right, because as I mentioned earlier, there's that huge amount of guilt and shame that they're dealing with, and so yes, you don't want to go in and just be fire and brimstone approach to it, because an individual will just shut down if you try that approach. So you want to really approach it with a non-judgmental but curious instinct of and exploring those negative feelings, those feelings of shame and guilt. But for a parent, yeah, it's never good to be confrontational, angry about it, because that's just going to automatically turn your teen into a defensive mode. So it really is just being curious and open about it, being supportive and empathetic to the struggles that they're dealing with. But yeah, in a clinical setting, I'm always trying to meet the client where they're at. I want to know what got them to this point, what they want to do, what their goals are. I can always, help and give my recommendations, but I really like my clients to be the ones to set the agenda, the ones to set the goal, because I want them to feel empowered that this is, their recovery, and I don't want to be the one, dictating the points to do it, because then that takes away their self-determination, their autonomy over their decision making. So I'm always working and supporting with them. I always, I'm walking with them, but I'm not being the one to tell them where to go.
why do you think there's like so much, like, I guess you keep talking about like the internal guilt and shame, but then
Mm-hmm.
on the outside it's so like normalized and destigmatized, like in the larger social society.
Sure. I think it's guilt and shame when it gets to that problematic and compulsive point, because a lot of times people will say, well, I see my friends who are able to gamble responsibly, they don't have this problem, but when I start gambling, I can't stop. And so there's this comparison almost to, oh, other people can do this normally and healthily or responsibly, but I can't. There must be something wrong with me. And so that's, yeah, you're right. It is very normalized in society, and people do have a healthy and responsible relationship with gambling where they're able to do it within limits and stop when they hit a certain point, and others just can't. And so that guilt and shame is driven by sometimes that comparison of, oh, hey, I've got a group of friends, they all sports bet, and they stop when they lose $20. But when I lose $20, I can't. I have to gamble another 20, and once I lose that, I have to gamble 40. And so that's a huge factor. The guilt and shame is that comparison to others and how they can maybe responsibly gamble, and why can't I?
I think you created these powered up courses. Am I correct on that? Or,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
so if you just maybe give the listeners a little more insight into what those are.
Sure. Yeah, the Powered Up courses, or the Powered Up program, is more so designed around video gaming. So these were two online self-paced courses that we created to help parents and kids/teenagers better understand their gaming, how to have a healthier balance when it comes to their video gaming. We touch on gambling within the course, but it's not the primary focus. This one's much more heavily catered towards video games. So we have a program called the Powered Up Parent, and so that is a program that is meant to help parents better understand their kids' gaming, have healthier conversations with their kids about gaming, and also empower them to be able to set better limits around their kids' gaming so that they can develop a healthier relationship overall, but also as a, a family unit, having a healthier relationship with screens and technology. And then the version for the gamer themselves is called the Powered Up Player, and it is meant to help individuals better understand their gaming. So getting more to the root cause of the motivations behind their play, which is a huge thing for both gaming and gambling. I always say problematic gambling and gaming when I'm meeting with someone in a clinical counseling setting, it's always the tip of the iceberg. There's always so much more going on underneath. So, somebody might come in, hey, I've got a problem with gambling, I have a problem with video gaming. But there's also so much more underneath, like self esteem issues, self confidence, anxiety, depression, that's, manifesting as problematic gaming and problematic gambling, but that's usually just the outlet, and so there's a lot more to uncover. So in the Powered Up Player, that's something we really focus on, is understanding the motivations behind your gaming, what draws you to video games, what might have allowed it to get to a problematic extent. And then we talk about what's a healthy life look like, and what's a healthy balance look like when it comes to video games, because I am a huge proponent when it comes to video games. I understand that they are an awesome thing. They're such a fun hobby to do. And so my goal is to never completely remove video games. It's more, how do we
Okay.
have a healthy understanding of how it fits into our overall life, where it's not the only thing we do in life. It's just a piece of a piece of the overall pie of life, that we can enjoy as well in moderation and in balanced with hobbies in life, school, work, academics, social life, those kind of things. How does it fit into that, rather than how do we fit everything else around it?
How do these programs go about it? I guess from a more format wise, because I feel like when you tend to lecture kids or give them a big speech or tell them to go do some program online, it's very difficult for sometimes for them to absorb and really apply some of the information, I guess.
Connor, that's a really good point, and it's the number one problem we've kind of run into with it. Is, you're right, especially with parents, it's a little different. We find that parents that can connect with these online courses, but I also like to use it in tandem with counseling, and I'll get to that point. But with the younger kids, you're right. They don't often want to sit down and just watch videos and read through an online course for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes it just doesn't keep their attention. But also we're seeing just, with the rise of the shift to, some online schooling, especially with the, lockdown during the pandemic, it really burned a lot of kids out from doing online
Yeah.
stuff, online educational content. So what I've started to do instead, I use it like kind of as a supplement to counseling. So it's something where it's not just, hey kid, go do this course and then you're good. It's, hey, let's focus on counseling first, and then, hey, go home and watch this level 1 of our course, and next week we're going to talk about it, we're going to explore this topic a little further. So I use it in tandem with counseling, but I found that counseling one-on-one comes first, and then we can use the course as a supplemental program to help carry on our work while we're not meeting on the days of the week that we're kind of not seeing each other. Hey, you can go do this, reflect on these questions, and we'll come back and discuss next time we meet individually. So yeah, you're spot on with, a lot of kids don't connect with just an online self-paced course. Adults a little different. We found some success with that, but I really, like to use the Powered Up courses in tandem with counseling. I find that's where they work best, is when they're used as a tool and resource rather than this is it.
If you don't mind me asking, how long have you been doing counseling, I guess, for?
Sure, I've been in this field 6 years now.
Yeah.
So yeah, doing both, working on my master's and then into private practice counseling. So that, yeah, I've seen a lot of again, that convergence of gambling and gaming. I've seen it take off in the 6 years that the 6 years that I've been doing this. I've seen it grow exponentially. So yeah, continuing to learn more and more about both gambling and gaming, and seeing it just rise in the forefront of society's mind. It really is a growing epidemic that we got to be aware of. Gambling, along with video games.
Do you think like COVID had a big part, I guess, to play inside of like I don't know if you noticed an increased amount of cases, after the pandemic, or if it's kind of been flat, but do you think that played a part or no?
I think definitely, because people were so around that time was when 2018 was when
Yeah.
sports betting started to get legalized. Then we obviously have the lockout or lockdown end of 2019, or I guess beginning of 2020, and so it really lined up for this perfect storm of people being stuck at home with nothing to do, and now I have a sports book or casino at my in my pocket essentially. And so I did see a lot of times older clients will reference the pandemic, the lockdown period, as a turning point into their development of a compulsive gambling or problem gambling, just because of there was not much to do. I was bored, and so I spent a lot of time doing this, and I got hooked that way. So I think the pandemic did not do anybody any favors when it came to gambling and gaming to an extent.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess as a sports fan, do you think gambling has changed just sports in general? I mean, there's obviously been a lot of stories like Terry Rozier, Chauncey Billups, those
Mm-hmm.
guys were caught. Probably some NFL ones I'm forgetting, but do you think it's changed the game in any way? You know, there's probably conspiracy theories about refs being paid off. Do you believe in that? I guess it's kind of an abstract question, but
Sure. I won't say whether I believe that games are rigged or not, but I will say it has led to people questioning the integrity of sports
Mhm.
because, yeah, you have seen stories of athletes manipulating their performance in order to win certain bets. So we see it in college sports, we see it in professional sports. So, yeah, I think it has called into question the integrity of sports. And so it leaves a lot of sports fans questioning, like, hey, was this poor performance because they just had a bad day, or was it intentionally sabotaged? So there's that aspect of it, but I think it's also changed sports in the way we talk about it. So as I mentioned,
Yeah.
sports shows, or even it's not even sports talk shows, it's live game commentary. They're throwing out different, lines and sports
Odds.
bets,
Yeah.
yeah, odds throughout an actual broadcast of the
Hmm.
game. So I think it's really altered the way people watch sports, and they maybe don't watch it for just entertainment purposes anymore. They watch it because hey, I've got money on this game. Like, oh, hey, I wouldn't. I'm a DC sports fan, so like, somebody might say like, hey, I wouldn't watch the Wizards versus the Hornets typically, but now I've got $100 on it, so I'm actually interested in it.
Yeah.
So I think it's changed a lot of ways that people interact and enjoy slash take in sports, and for the most part, it's not for the better. So yes, I think it has definitely influenced how people consume sports today.
Yeah. I've definitely noticed a similar trend at like the lunch table. You know, it used to be just about the stats and the decisions on the court and strategy and stuff like that,
Hmm.
but more and more like I guess bet like gambling like discussions have definitely entered the same type of chats
Right.
for
Yeah.
sure.
It's a really great point, Connor, there, because at a lunch table, hey, let's say somebody hit a buzzer beater. Um, 20 years ago, maybe not even 20 years ago, we're talking about how awesome of a shot that would be. Today, we might be talking about how that, backdoored the over instead of the under, instead of
Hmm.
how amazing of a shot it would be. Yeah, the discussion is much more gambling centric than actually focused on the sport itself.
I guess to start wrapping things up, if you could change one thing, I guess either a law, habit,
Hmm.
what would you point towards?
Oh boy, just one. Let's see. I'll give you two. I would get rid.
All right.
I would get rid of prediction markets. I
Okay.
think they don't have a place in society. I don't think they're healthy for anyone. So I would just, if I could, get rid of those. The second one I would do that I think is potentially more realistic is really start to address advertising for
Okay.
gambling.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
whether this is limiting commercial advertising, advertising on social media, I would really, maybe if it's not getting rid of it completely, I don't know if that's a realistic goal, but it would definitely be addressing it in some ways in which we're really starting to limit it, in similar ways that we limited cigarette advertising and things like that. I really think that is a good place to start in terms of pushing back on the normalization of gambling, is really addressing how much it's advertised, especially to young, impressionable audiences.
Okay. And then one question I just came up with, I guess, before
Yeah.
the final question, is I guess what's a win look like for one of your clients? Like, there's obviously a very different type of win for certain people on the spectrum. But I guess like for you, what would you consider a win?
I think it obviously, it's unique to each individual's goal. I think if we're talking someone who's trying not to gamble, it's every 24 hours that you don't. We're not looking much farther than that. I know,
Okay.
sometimes clients really want to look long term, and I think that's good in moderation. But really, I think a win for each client who's trying not to gamble is how do I get through the next 24 hours? When I do that, that's a success. How do I get through the next 24 hours? Um, I think we really got to look at it on a granular level like that, where you know we're just focused on what can I do today to make myself better.
And if you had one thing that you could tell every single parent or wish they knew, and then one for a student or a potential problem gambler, I guess in the future, what would you tell to each of them?
I think for parents, it's really never too early to have a conversation about gambling. I don't think it's something you should wait to talk about until they're in college or then until they're 21. I think it's naive to think, oh, my kid's not gambling until they're 18 or 21. I would have this conversation very early, when they're 11, 12, 13, to just talk about it, not to again fire and brimstone talk about it, just to be curious about it, to have healthy conversations of, hey, this is what gambling is, this is why it's risky. I'm not under the impression that you might not gamble at some point in the future. Same kind of conversation you have around alcohol. Be naive to think that a kid's never going to potentially try gambling, never potentially drink. And so you want to make sure that they are aware of the risks around it. So yeah, for parents, it's just have that conversation early and often, in a non-judgmental, more curious way. For teenagers, if I think the best advice I would give is, if you find yourself having a problem, never hesitate on reaching out for help. I know it's tough. I know it's scary. I know, again, that shame and guilt is strong, but it's so important that you reach out for help, whether it's to a friend, family member, reaching out to a professional counselor if that's what you need. But yeah, never be afraid to ask for help, and that's not just gambling related. I think as well, just mental health in general. If you're struggling, don't feel like you have to do it by yourself. We are a connected species. We are, as humanity, we want to help each other, although sometimes it might not seem like it. We really want to make sure that, everyone's reaching out and asking for help when they need it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Matt. Your insight about a lot of things, but especially how gaming and gambling have become so close, and there are a lot of the mechanisms that are so similar is very interesting, I guess. Where can people find you and your counseling organization if they want to reach out for help?
Sure, sure. So I work for a private practice group called the Better Institute. We're a
Okay.
group of wonderful clinicians. All have their own unique specialties. All have some background in problem gambling work, treatment. So yeah, the Better Institute. We're located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but it's a great group of clinicians. So if you ever find yourself struggling with problem gambling or problem video gaming, please feel free to reach out to us or myself. I can share my contact information, or you can find it on our website at betterinstitute.com.
Yep. Well, that's gonna be all she wrote for us, guys. Thank you so much for listening, Matt. Once again, thank you so much for joining here and giving me so much of your precious time.
Of course.